former Congressman Dan Lipinski, who I always like to say has a PhD because that elevates him above congressman. Congressman, welcome. Congressman on Congressman Action. Question for Congressman Khanna.
Thank you, Mark. But you have to know that when I was in Congress, I never wanted anyone to call me doctor or say I had a PhD.
Yeah. Egghead.
Yeah, I don't like them. Especially in my district with my my base. And so that kind of gets to what I wanted to ask Ro about. I like a lot of things that you've been talking about lately, Ro. And you had the piece in the Boston Globe, which I thought it had some good ideas about reaching out to voters that, Democratic Party, we've lost in some of these areas in people who feel left behind. It's not just economics. It's also the idea that their beliefs on social issues are unacceptable to the Democratic Party. And so, back in 2018, 2020, as a pro-life Democrat, you were very active in helping to get rid of me. And I lost the 2020 primary. You said at the time it was a no-brainer for other of our colleagues to endorse my opponent because I was anti-choice. So I'm very happy to see in this Boston Globe piece that I mentioned that you talk about how we, as a party, we need to not shame people or cancel people who have a different position on, on social issues. So, is that your position now? Are you more accepting of people? Would I be acceptable? Am I acceptable now in the Democratic Party as a Democratic if I wanted to run for Congress again, or am I, is it not acceptable for me to be a Democrat? And I think that's one of the big issues. That's an issue that we have faced, not just on the abortion issue, but on other issues where people feel like the party just doesn't really want them in the party. I wasn't in a rural district, but there's a lot of my voters who felt that way about the party, and Trump picked up pretty good in my old district this time.
Okay, Congressman, great question, and I appreciate the way you phrased it. Congressman Khanna, first, before you answer, is the congressman's characterization of the position you took, to your recollection, accurate?
It is. I appreciate the diplomatic way that Dan asked the question. I've always respected him, but I supported Maureen Newman in his primary, and I supported her in part because of her position on choice, and I thought in that district we should have someone who reflected the voters' view on supporting the Roe versus Wade framework. That said, I respect Dan. I appreciated he had seen me with Bishop Barron, and I certainly think he has a place in the Democratic Party, and that one can have a view that you have in a Democratic constituency where the vast majority of people are for the Roe versus Wade framework, that you want someone representing that district with that. But that doesn't mean that, Dan, I don't respect your public service, that I judge your positions. I understand where you're coming from, and we need dialogue. And, I'd love to continue. I'm fond of Abraham Lincoln's quote that he manages to destroy his enemies by making them his friends. So have I matured? When people say, do you change in Congress? I think one of the things I've learned over the years in Congress is not to be as hot-headed, that to have some sense of, not that I was ever hot-headed, but to have a sense that, okay, if you disagree, you can disagree reasonably. And I appreciate very much the diplomatic and civil way you asked the question.
Well,
I do as well. Good. Go ahead,
I'm not asking for an endorsement, but if I were there, would you still support someone against me in the primary based on that? You still think are good?
It depends if you were, look, I think in an environment where women's rights matters, if you were representing a district that was very, very, very pro women's rights and having
I'm not anti-women's rights.
Okay, I don't want to mischaracterize you. Very much for the I'm not trying to, very much for the Roe versus Wade framework as the district you were is. And if there was a candidate who said, look, I want to represent that perspective, I think that's fine. But do I think that if you were representing a district where there was a much more split opinion on that, or a place where that there actually was pro-life, that everyone in the Democratic caucus has to be pro-choice? No, I don't. I think it was also a matter with your district. But look, I've heard great things about your views on labor issues, on manufacturing issues. It wasn't a personal judgment. I didn't ever come after you in terms of your character or your service. I just thought in that district we should have someone who was reflective of pro-choice, especially given the context of Roe versus Wade being overturned.
Congressman Lipinski, we're going to have to let your former colleague go, but I want just to ask you, Congressman Khanna, should the Democratic Party be more welcoming to people to participate in the party, elected officials and others who are pro-life? Is that a good aspiration for the party to have?
Yeah, because in rural parts of the country, factory towns and other places, there are going to be constituencies that are pro-life. And if someone's getting elected there, even if we disagree with them, absolutely. And if if President Biden called up or whoever had said, I want to put Dan as an ambassador, I want to make Dan labor secretary, I want to make Dan, I would not oppose Dan, you're serving in different roles because of your views on pro-life. It was representing a district that was overwhelmingly pro-choice and not being in step with that. But I'd love to have coffee when I'm next in Chicago if you're still there. And you were quite diplomatic in how you answered that question, asked that question. You could have been held a grudge, and maybe you still do, but didn't express that, and I appreciate that.
If you two have coffee, I'll come, not to participate or referee, but just to take notes. Congressman Khanna, you got to go. And I like your staff.
Yeah.
As I said, they're more powerful. So we're very grateful to you for making time. And we hope you'll come back and really appreciate your participation in this.
I'll say this last thing,
you.
Marco. This is the advantage of doing these kind of things, that you get Dan. I didn't know Dan was going to ask that question, and people see you not talking on talking points. And I just think the more people do that, you get a sense of them. It forces you to think, and that was what was missing in our campaign. It was the lack of spontaneity. You need to do more of that in the modern context.
And just to be clear, the congressman has appeared here before. I didn't know the history between you. And I'm delighted for the moment, and I'm delighted with the way both of you handle it and appreciative of the way you both handled it. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
Congressman, great to see you. Congressman, great to